When did you feel disappointed with your family? My mom later told me that before I was born, she had been pregnant with a boy, but due to unfortunate timing, they decided to have an abortion. When it came to my turn, the doctor told my mom that I might have developmental issues. My mom didn't believe it, but my dad did. He said, "Let's terminate the pregnancy." My grandma, however, went to a church and spoke to a pastor, who reassured her, "This child will be fine. Keep it." So, I was born in a hospital in Washington, D.C., at 3:47 a.m. For many years after, my dad would point at me and say, "That pastor was wrong." Ha ha. So for a while, I thought I really might be slow. I even told people, "I'm actually not that bright." Pretty impressive, huh? My classmates in elementary school didn't believe me, but I would insist. It's not me saying it. It's what my dad said. When I was a toddler, just weaned, I was sent to live with my grandparents back in the Midwest. My grandpa often told me that my parents were working hard in D.C., and their apartment was too small for 3 people. He said they'd bring me back once they had settled in. Whenever I threw a tantrum, my grandpa would say, "If you're not good, your parents will never take you back to D.C." Apparently, this worked well because my aunts and uncles always repeated it when I misbehaved. If you don't behave, your parents won't take you to D.C. Back then, I believed that was the worst punishment imaginable. Later, my little sister was born. When I heard the news, I was excited for a long time. I assumed their lives had improved, and now I could go to D.C. I eagerly waited for my parents to come and get me by the end of the year. It was still over 6 months until the new year, but during that time, I was exceptionally well behaved. My grandparents even thought I was a different person. In reality, I was just scared. I was afraid that if I misbehaved even a little, they wouldn't come back for me. As the end of the year approached, my excitement grew. I even separated my favorite clothes in the closet and bought a new backpack with the money I had saved up for 6 months. I wanted to pack my favorite clothes when they came to get me and follow them back to D.C. When they finally arrived, they were holding my sister's hand. She had a pink suitcase with frilly dresses inside. At the time, I didn't know that one of her dresses cost more than everything in my closet combined. For the next few days, I was nervous around my dad. He seemed cold, only smiling when my sister acted cute around him. My grandparents urged him to drink less, and other relatives sat around talking about his childhood. I sat quietly in the corner, not sure what to do. All I could think was, after the new year, I'll be able to go to D.C. On the day they were leaving, my parents held my sister's hand and walked out. I followed them with my new backpack. A van was waiting at the entrance of the village to take them to the train station. I knew that van. It was always the same one, silver, with peeling paint, yellow plates, and tinted windows that hid the inside. My parents got into the van with my sister. I stood in front of it, watching them. Suddenly, my dad turned and asked, "What are you doing?" I didn't know how to answer. Then the door slammed shut with a loud bang. I couldn't see inside, but I heard the engine start, and they drove off, heading north toward a small bridge. I stood there and watched them go up the hill and disappear from sight. I thought they had forgotten me, so I waited at the village entrance. After a while, I felt a wave of sadness and started crying. It turns out that even if I was well behaved, they still wouldn't take me to D.C. I went back home, threw myself on the bed, and cried and cried. After a while, I decided to run away. I copied what I'd seen on TV, grabbed a piece of paper, and wrote 3 words, "I'm leaving." Then I walked out, heading south from the village. I thought that if I climbed over the mountain, I'd reach Washington, D.C. Years later, I found out that beyond that mountain was another mountain, and beyond that was a river. The distance from Missouri to Washington, D.C. is over 1,000 miles, with hundreds of small towns and forests in between. Every step I took wasn't even half a meter, and I couldn't even keep up with that peeling van. Some distances can't be bridged no matter how hard you try. Later, my mom got pregnant again. My dad was too busy to help, so my grandma said she'd go to D.C. to lend a hand. It was summer vacation, and I begged to go too. It was my first time taking the train. When we arrived at Union Station, my dad picked us up in his car. As we drove home, he talked to my grandma, and I stared out the window at the city, unable to tell what was different about it. When we got to the apartment, I realized it was a 3-bedroom. My parents had the master bedroom, my sister had another bedroom, and there was an empty room reserved for my unborn brother. There was a photo on the TV stand, a family photo of my pregnant mom, my dad in a suit, and my sister holding their hands at an amusement park, all smiling happily. In the bathroom, my sister had her own toothbrush and cup, and by the door, their shoes were neatly arranged. The house seemed big, but there didn't seem to be a place for me. As I grew older, I finally moved to D.C. for school. One of my essays got published in the school newspaper, and I won an award in a writing competition. I excitedly brought my certificate home, and my dad glanced at it and tossed me $10. I used that money to buy a notebook where I wrote down my teacher's praise and my dreams of how I would repay my parents one day. I pretended to forget it on the living room table, hoping my dad would read it, but he never opened it. He was never curious about me, never tried to peek into my life. Deep down, I knew it wasn't out of respect. It was something colder, harder to describe. Once, I failed an exam. My teacher called my dad. After the call, he ripped up the test paper and threw it in the trash without saying a word or hitting me. He just looked at me blankly for a moment and then went to bed. For a long time, I thought he just didn't know how to be a father. But when my brother was born, I realized he just didn't love me. I used to love drawing comics. One of my award-winning drawings was noticed by my teacher. One day after school, my homeroom teacher called my dad, telling him there was a famous art teacher who could teach me. My teacher said I shouldn't waste my talent. I stood between them, and for the first time, I saw my dad smile. He thanked my teacher profusely. I stood there holding my comic book, which had been passed around every class at school. Afterward, as we drove home, I sat in the back, holding my comic book, feeling hopeful. Once we got on the highway, my dad asked me to hand him the comic. I thought he wanted to take a look. Instead, he rolled down the window and threw it out. He turned to me and said, "Don't embarrass me." The pages of my comic scattered in the wind, turning into litter on the highway. I didn't even dare to cry. I remember when my little brother got a simple gold star in kindergarten. My dad made sure to share the news with every relative at the dinner table. I had been at the top of my class for years. A week before my middle school entrance exams, my dad promised that if I scored over 90 in all 3 subjects, I could stay in D.C. and study art. I studied like crazy that week, asking so many questions that even my teachers were annoyed. In the end, I got the high scores, handed my report card to my dad, and eagerly waited for him to fulfill his promise. But instead, he told me I was going back to the Midwest to take the high school entrance exams. I had worked so hard to come to D.C., and now, because of that very effort, I had to leave. From that moment on, I stopped caring about my studies. On my first day back in the village school, I didn't fit in with the local kids and got into a fight. Someone hit me over the head with a brick, and I bled profusely. Under pressure from my grandparents, my dad brought me back to D.C. and enrolled me in a private school, where I lived in a dorm. I think that's when I started to hate the idea of family. After I finished middle school, I was supposed to continue to high school at the same school. But my dad told me I had to transfer because the high school's acceptance rate for top universities was only 10%, which was too low. I was surprised, but in the end, he forgot about it. I spent the entire summer at home, and on the first day of school, he took me to a different school. When I went inside to pay the fees, I realized it was a vocational school. Tuition was $2,300, and I didn't have time to find another school. My brother attended a prestigious private school, and his tuition was $30,000. I didn't understand why my dad treated me so differently until I grew older and realized that my birth was a mistake to him. He wasn't ready to be a father, but he was pressured by the family to have a child. My existence meant he had to take on responsibilities he didn't want. He resented me for it, even though I did nothing wrong. By the time my brother and sister came along, he had figured it all out. He finally understood what being a father meant, but I had been born at the wrong time. Every mistake he made with me became a lesson in how to raise them. I hadn't been born at the right time to be his son, and for that, I should probably feel sorry. The fact that I'm still alive today is thanks to no one but myself, because I never hated him, and I never hated anyone.